Warning, this episode contains strong language or mature themes. Parental discretion is advised.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing good, man. All right.
Cool. Welcome to This Podcast is Uncalled For.
What's uncalled for about it?
Well, you can't tell anybody this.
I'm listening.
Oh my God, what are you doing?
Don't be ashamed to be a supporter of Barack Obama for the next 2 years or for the rest of your lives, because you should be proud of what you've done.
I worship Cthulhu just for the free beer.
But you didn't even give a chance for a wild card spot.
Well, the name of this podcast is Stuff Uncalled For?
This podcast is uncalled.
Podcast, all right.
Yeah, that was the most ridiculous ending to that game that I've ever seen.
Oh my gosh, I gotta hurry up. Oh my gosh, I gotta hurry up. Oh my gosh, I gotta hurry up.
We're looking at each other in the eye. We're not going to say anything derogatory to the other person. And, of course, neither of us is drunk.
Another thing that differentiates Mormonism from Catholicism is I don't hear Pope Francis saying that he's a prophet, seer, and revelator.
See, this is a disgrace.
Hey, we're getting somewhere.
And now, your host for this podcast, Mike Chernefsky.
Fuji!
Mike? Mm-hmm. All right. How's everybody doing tonight? Good. Right. Welcome to my little seminar on editing for podcasts. Yes, that is how my last name is spelled. That's my email and phone number. I'll give you a couple seconds to get that written down.
And by the way, if anyone wants this, email me, and I will send the slide deck after the meetup.
Okay, so a little bit about me to establish my credentials in podcasting. My starts in media production was actually in video. Started off as a hobbyist in the independent film community, which we have a great independent film community here in Kansas City. And during those early years, I served a couple of years on the board of the Independent Filmmakers Coalition, Kansas City. Then at some point, about a decade ago, I decided to go back to school and formally study some video at Johnson County Community College. During that time, I got an internship at KCPT, our local public television station, and that's what that photo is me at KCPT just before taping Week in Review. And I've also done some contract work since then, including, but not limited to, C-SPAN. I've also done music videos and other type of video. In fact, one of my current clients is the League of Women Voters of Johnson County. In terms of podcasting, now when I was back in school, I was approached to do my first podcast, and that would be Sunflower Brew, which was hosted by Zach Luia, who ran for the Kansas House in 2012. Then right after he lost that election, he came up with the idea of doing this podcast where we would have guests on, talk politics, and drink beers. And they were always craft beers. I found out the hard way doing this podcast that don't give me any dark beers, because I found those like drinking ash or something. And I was only a producer on this one, and then near the end of that run, because Zach had twins, I started a second podcast, The Winning Side Coaches, which was me and a rotation of friends, and it was mostly sports discussion, so we would talk about certain things happening in sports and everything, and that was fun. It lasted a good 250 some episodes before it got to the point I was more interested in talking about lawsuits than that was actual sports. And then this past summer, I started my third and current podcasts. This podcast is Uncalled For. And this one is basically my autobiography in podcast form. By the way, I am recording tonight's seminar as part of the podcast. So, how cool is that?
That's cool.
Yeah. And it covers a wide variety of topics, including the topics of the previous two podcasts. But I've also included the first 3 episodes are all interviews with film and actor friends of mine. And to get to your points, I made the mistake early on to try to do it as a weekly. But then after a while, I was like, I'm getting burned out by this, so I'm going to end season 1, take a little break, and then do a second season. And we are currently in that second season. It is a bi-weekly now, with a couple of special episodes. In fact, my most downloaded episode so far is one of those specials. It was done for Halloween. Telling some ghost stories from my Boy Scouts. And of course, I'm the co-organizer of the Podcasters Meetup. Now, you gentlemen said you are video editors, right?
No.
No. Okay. So
we want to start a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I actually had a show on YouTube for 3 years,
All right.
fantasy football, and we kind of let it go because the podcast is the way to go down. And the video show we had to keep the clips so short and whatnot, so we want to move into podcasting area instead.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't really have any video experience whatsoever.
Well, I heard you guys mention videos, that's why I asked. Which brings me to my next slide. If you can edit video, you can easily edit an audio-only podcast. That's because you're only dealing with half of the equation, all right? Video, pretty complex stuff. Let's take away the audio. You're now no longer obsessed with how everything looks. You're more interested in how everything sounds. But that's you should be concerned about sound when you're editing video as well. That's it. What should you do before you edit? Well, traditionally, we talk about producing media, especially if you're talking about video. We talk about the 3 stages: pre-production, production, post-production. Who knows what happens in the pre-production stage? Anyone?
You're getting guests.
Yeah.
You're setting up your environment.
Yeah.
You get a computer to record on. You got to have all the things.
Yeah. Pre-production is basically gathering your resources. Make sure you have guests to talk to. Making sure everything's working properly. You got yourself a good microphone. You got yourself some good software. Everything. Then we get to the production phase, and that is you're actually recording your stuff. In the production phase, you want to make sure that your environment is as quiet as humanly possible. And sometimes that's not possible if you're meeting someone at a location, which happens to me a lot. Actually, I'll usually ask my guests, where do you want to meet at? You want to meet at your house? You want to meet in your office? You want to meet at a coffee shop? You want to make sure your equipment is good, everything. Get yourself a good microphone. And you can get yourself a good microphone for under $100.
There's actually a card over there for the Samsung Q2U.
Mm-hmm.
I think, so if you want to know about that, that's a really good mic, which is XLR. So over there, just one of the smaller cards in the front.
Mm-hmm. And another thing I want to suggest, something that they teach theater actors all the time: project. This is especially helpful if the environment you're forced to record in is not as quiet as humanly possible. Like I said, at a coffee house, you still have hundreds of, well, maybe not hundreds, but lots of conversations happening around you. And that's a good way to separate your voice from all the other background noise happening around you. Get yourself some good software. These are 3 different editing softwares that I have used in my podcasting. We'll start with Audacity. Audacity is free to use. Everything. I have not figured out how to edit in Audacity, but I use it all the time just for the recording side of things. So I'll plug in my mic, I'll record in Audacity, and then export it to edit in either the 2 other softwares listed. Question?
Why do you prefer to record in Audacity over Audition?
That is a good question, just a personal preference. So. Now we get to the editing, the actual editing software. For both Sunflower Brewing and Lakeside Coaches, I used GarageBand, which you can only get if you use a Mac. If you're a media person, odds are you're probably on a Mac anyway. It's a good, solid program. For some reason, I just can't get it anymore. So, but I currently edit on Adobe Audition. It's part of the bigger Adobe suite. So if you edit on Premiere Pro, or if you do Photoshop, or Illustrator, or After Effects, you'll get Audition in that suite as well. Question?
So for guys like us, when we finally figure it out, what, to start out, Audacity?
Audacity, Audacity is a good free program to use, and again, I only use it to record my audio. For editing, you want to use one of the other 2 if you can.
Audition's $20 a month. We're doing a total subscription base for all this stuff.
So that's
And I got my Adobe Suite.
Audition.
I got my Adobe Suite before they went to subscription base.
Yeah, you lucked out.
I lucked out, yeah. I'm going to share with you some tools that you can use in Adobe Audition. Some may be present in other softwares. I'm not 100% sure, but you can do this in Audition. Next slide, please. One is noise reduction. So again, the coffee shop scenario. What you can do to reduce the noise, you can select a small bit of background noise, isolate it, and then take that over the entire clip, press a button, and that background noise is mostly canceled out. I think it's a pretty cool thing. By the way, to take it back to film and video for a second, in film, there's something called room tone. What they'll do is everyone is quiet for a couple of seconds, and the audio engineer will just record silence, getting the tone of the room. Same principle here. Next is clipping. This is basically standard for any audio software, video software. You're looking for the razor blade icon, if you're using an icon-based software. And this is what you'll do to cut your audio up. You'll use it to cut up silences. You'll use it to cut up the ums and other verbal pauses that may show up. Question?
If you're using the clipping tool, you have to have a beginning and an end, evidently, to get a range. Okay.
Yep.
You can't just put it on one thing.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. You have to select the point at which you're clipping.
Actually, you can also use trim, so you can make one splice, and then use your cursor, and you can move your the actual bar over to where the audio begins or ends, and so you can just make one splice and then trim up the edges. It's pretty quick.
Okay.
Yeah. trim, and also another word for what I'm trying to describe here. So, yeah, thank you. All right. So we also have volume control / fades. So I like to have my audio fade in and out throughout my podcast. So I'll start at my intro, I'm going to fade out and then fade in my vocals, and I'll do that for every break in the. So what I mean by that is my dialogue stops. I'm going to fade in some music as a transition, then fade out of the music to the next section, and so on and so forth until the end, and then I like to fade out. You can do this easily in your software, especially in Audition. It's really easy to do. And you can also crossfade. Going back to trimming for a second, you can also crossfade your cuts to make it sound as fluid and singular as possible, which is pretty darn cool. Track management, kind of what I'm talking about. You'll more likely see multiple tracks in your setup. My suggestion: one track will just be your audio and everything. Another track, your music, your transitions, all that good stuff, and so on, whatever your podcast needs. And then there's some other cool audio effects that you can play with, like making everyone sound like robots, or making everyone sound like they're underwater. Just some really cool stuff that you can play with. But of course, the most important thing about editing, you want to listen as you edit. Make sure it sounds good to your ears and get you to think, will this appeal to my listeners? Yeah.
If you've got, you're looking at tracks, you've got your audio track.
Right.
Say you want to bring in say an MP3 soundtrack.
Right.
When you import it, will it automatically start at the same, right at the beginning of all your recordings? So that, I mean, I'm just wondering, or do you have to put your cursor right there at the beginning of your
you need to put
your audio thing?
You need to drag the audio file into the exact spot that you want it.
Okay.
All right.
I mean, okay, the sound file into the exact spot. Okay.
Yeah, that's how that works.
Okay.
And that's where that layering effect, using managing your tracks, that's where that comes into play.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions before we continue? No? Let's talk about music for a little bit. Yeah, some of us might be inclined to want to use popular music, but there's a big problem with trying to use that type of music, also known as copyright infringements. So, if you want to use music, here's what you're looking for. Either short of composing your own, all right? Look for stuff that's in the public domain, as Rob was talking about earlier. Look for stuff that has a Creative Commons license attached to it, which is a really cool thing. You can use someone's music and don't have to pay them, but you do have to say in your podcast, this song is in here, it's under a Creative Commons license.
When you do that, do you have to actually say that in the podcast, or is it legally, do you just have to put it in the notes? Or does it depend on the request of the person you're getting the music from?
I would do both.
ccmixter.org is a place you can find Creative Commons music.
Yeah.
And what they've said is if you put it in the ID3 tag information, that is okay. From that site, depending on the license. But for most licenses, And that's ccmixter.org, and that's all Creative Commons music.
What is what mixture?
Mixter. Mixter.org.
If you're looking at an article that's related to the content that you're trying to put up, I know there's maybe some fair use type laws, but I was just wondering if you're just summarizing the article in your own words, is that okay? And if you wanted to use a quote, do you have to get permission from that author? Any ideas on that?
Well, it goes back to fair use and everything. But I would absolutely attribute the.
Certainly do that.
Yeah.
Right, bibliography type thing. And then do a show notes.
A couple podcasters recently got in trouble for this. One was a true crime podcast.
Crime Junkie.
Yeah, thank you. And they basically copied and pasted. Yeah, I mean, and then the other one was the Dollop, and but their whole thing was they just read the article and then riffed on it. And so, but it was questionable on that one. The True Crime Junkie was complete pirate. It was complete theft.
They transcribed other podcasters' podcasts and read them. They didn't have no really.
Yeah. No.
Even, I mean, you couldn't do that, but even if you can't even do that if you're going to, even though you're attributing, the source. I mean, even though you say.
Look, if you're talking about an article and you read a quote out of an article, as long as you're saying where it's coming from, that's fine. You can't read the whole article, but a piece of it. Fine.
You quote a
But
book
you
or
can't,
something,
right.
you attribute their
Right.
name, do you also need to put it in the show notes?
You don't need to put it. You need to say it. You need to say it. You should put it in the show notes, but you need to say it in the podcast.
For sure.
The other one is no music that isn't copyright, right? And there is no fair use. I mean, the only example I've heard of anyone that said a fair use, which you could kind of justify, was if you had a podcast and you're talking about suicide, and you played a little clip from Jeremy, right? From Pearl Jam. You could kind of get away with it in that one scenario, but it's really tough to justify, and you don't want to spend the legal fees.
In a very short clip of it.
Right.
Is there a process? So I have someone who's composed, well, my husband has composed music for me because he's a musician composer. Is there a process through which he needs to get it trademarked or copyrighted? No?
Copyright. Technically, a copyright exists the minute he creates
it, right. But is there any process that's typical to follow to make sure, I mean, do I need to say that or?
It'd be a good idea to attribute the music to him.
And the copyright did it of his music.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you see the little kid that was walking by, that's my son. So he creates music. So he's created music for me for my podcast. He creates it on GarageBand on the computer. And it's very original, but one of his songs actually, when I uploaded the podcast to YouTube, got a takedown notice. Someone tried to claim it. So yeah,
same thing happened to me.
Yeah.
You use the loops from GarageBand. Someone has written an album just for those loops, and so now they claim they can demonetize your YouTube video because they own that music.
Which by the way, Apple
bogus.
has said is completely in the public domain. Those loops. So I fought back and said, nope. I have the GarageBand track to show you all those clips, and I go, and that's not. So they actually then gave in and said, okay. But conversely, he's 11 years old, and he sent me a song recently, and I heard the song, and I went, that doesn't sound like what he normally does. And I go, it sounds familiar. So I put Shazam up to it and popped up a song. And I go, what did you do? I go, this isn't your song. He goes, well, I got the GarageBand track, and I added cowbells to it. So adding cowbells to someone else's music, by the way, is not.
More cowbells.
Yeah, exactly. But so I had to teach him a little bit that adding cowbells doesn't make it your song, right? All his other stuff he did originally.
Teachable moment.
Yes. Yeah. And thank you for Shazam. And I almost put it in my podcast, but I was like, that doesn't sound like what he normally creates. And I was like, okay. All right.
Can you also go to copyright.gov though and maybe add it in? I don't know. I mean, it seems like it cost you a few bucks, but if you were that concerned about it.
Yeah, if you were that concerned. If you're that concerned, you're going to get a music label, right? And they're going to take care of it.
Right.
So, I don't know if this is related or not, but there's a lot of videos on YouTube now that are reaction videos to songs.
Uh-huh.
And how do they get away with that?
That is a great question.
I mean, I noticed what they do is they have the name of the band up there, they have an album cover the entire time while they're doing it. But it seems like more and more people seem to be doing that because it's an easy way to get attention to yourself.
Huh.
I think that they pause the song, give a reaction, start it, pause it, start it, pause it, like every 5 seconds.
You can use pieces.
Maybe that's what they do. That might be the
No, because you're critiquing something.
The ones it's 2 guys out of New York, and that's the format they do. It's all what they're really doing. I think they're flying kind of on the radar. Their approach, I think, is they're acting as critics because it's the first time listening to, so they're kind of critiquing it, normally from potentially a different culture or subculture in the large United States, like the ones I've seen. It's my kind of rock music. It's old Metallica, it's 70s heavy metal and stuff like that. And there's 2 guys who don't normally listen to that kind of music, and so they're sort of critiquing it if you're a first-time listener in their sort of group and culture population.
Yeah, that is a great question. I'm not a lawyer, so I probably know the implications, but I think it's borderline infringement. So I personally won't do it, but do it at your own risk. That's what I'm saying. And I am reminded of a older YouTube video. It was Young Turks, actually. They did a critique of a Bulgarian rap song, and they got plenty of Bulgarian hate mail for that because they made fun of it. Fuck you, baby! Fuck my English. All right. Anyway, let's continue on. So we covered public domain. We covered Creative Commons. Another good resource for music is stock music. Just like in a film, we have stock photos and stock footage that we can splice into our projects. There also exists stock music. Not exactly the greatest music in the world by any stretch of imagination, but I will say this from my own personal experience: you gotta be careful using stock music, because I did get a copyright claim on a piece of stock music.
YouTube has a ton of sound effects and music clips and stuff.
Right.
And the creator.
Okay.
Right.
Next slide.
Back one.
Back one.
So the first one I want to suggest, I love this site, incompetech.com. That's so, incompetech.com. These are all songs created by a guy named Kevin MacLeod. He makes them available to everyone under a Creative Commons license. Just have to make sure you attribute him for the work, and you're good to go. And I like using his music. It's actually pretty good. And another I want to suggest is Free Music Archive, which was bought out fairly recently, I think, but it still provides a free music resource. So this is more of your more of the undiscovered art talents, everything, just putting their stuff out to use. And they are mostly Creative Commons licenses as well.
There's a site called freesound.org, which if you're looking for sound effects, is a really good one.
Royalty-free is a good keyword search.
Mm-hmm. With that said, let's go back to stock music for a second. You may have to pay a subscription for that.
And you have to be careful when you pay for music that for podcasts that make sure you're getting a mechanical license, because your podcast is a download. Download legally is a mechanical copy. So a lot of these services, they'll sell stuff for YouTubers for music, but that's a streaming, not a mechanical copy. So you have to be careful. What works for YouTube does not work for podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
most of them have personal use, which is just for yourself.
Yeah.
Mechanical
That's,
is for business.
Rob's point's a really good one. Someone who plays, I don't play for money, I mean, I guess I'm a professional guitarist, but it's not, I don't do it for a living. The mechanical licensing is a big deal, because especially on the royalty-free, you'll see a lot, but it's not for mechanical rights. So it's,
All right. And the next slide, that's the end of the presentation portion, so I'll do a little shameless self-promotion. All right. So these are some of the links you can find my podcast. So we have uncalledforpod.libsyn.com. This podcast is Uncalled For. It is published on Libsyn. We also have my Facebook for the podcast, facebook.com/uncalledforpodcasts. And then the blog. We all have to have a blog, right, for the podcast. That is the WordPress blog. You can find that at uncalledfor.home.blog. And of course, I have a Patreon, and that's where you'll find my Patreon, and that's going to apply for more long-term and not just this podcast, but any other projects I might have. And we will open it to questions.
I have a question just from that, kind of related to the last slide. Do you have to have an actual website for your podcast? Or you can just, we use the software that we talked about and throw it up on the different platforms? Do you need an actual website?
You just need a blog.
Well,
really.
you need a place to host your media file.
Yeah,
Right.
Right.
And that's where Libsyn and other podcast hosts come in. And you'll get
Yeah,
a
I saw
website.
you had that,
Right.
that website, so
Mo-
that would.
Yeah.
But people that want to hear your podcast go to that, like .libsyn.com to
Almost,
find it, or
almost nobody goes
They
to your
just-
website.
Yeah.
like that website just hosts it
Yeah.
for him.
Yeah,
It stores
exactly.
his episodes and okay.
Exactly. I am on the Apple Podcasts and Stitch. No, I don't know if I'm on Stitcher.
You
but,
are.
I am on Stitcher. Okay. All right. So I know I'm on all those podcasts through Libsyn.
Okay, and through Libsyn you can, like all the main platforms, or pick and choose? Or?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
And it's free to put your podcast on those platforms from Libsyn because it's included in the
Right.
script? Okay.
As a matter of fact, here's a very simple thing. If you ever come across a directory or a place for consumption and they ask you to pay to put your podcast there,
Yeah.
run away.
Okay, got it. Well, because I noticed he said he's not on Stitcher. I mean, would you not just want your podcast on everything possible?
Yeah,
Okay.
my opinion is yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I believe be everywhere,
Yeah.
even Luminary. I mean,
But do
I
you-
make fun of it, but.
Do you tell
Okay.
Libsyn, do you tell Libsyn where to put it, or Libsyn?
Okay, so when you first submit to Apple Podcasts, and I have a little bit here at the end we can go over, but when you submit to Apple Podcasts, from there it's going to get pulled into a lot of places. Overcast, Pocket Cast, CastBox, all pull from the Apple Podcast directory. So just by submitting to Apple Podcasts, you're going to get in a lot of places. And you do want to submit to Apple Podcasts yourself so that you control the show. You can go in and check the stats from Apple by doing that. And then there's other places that you have to submit to, like Spotify and iHeartRadio and Radio.com and others that you need to submit to. But submitting to Apple is going to get you in 120 different places.
And I won't argue Rob's expertise at all or challenge it in podcasting, but I have a different opinion as on, because this is still a digital content, it's still in the digital realm, if you will, and virtual realm. I personally believe no matter what you do, you should probably have your own web presence outside of a good hosting platform.
I'm not saying don't have a website
Yeah,
at all.
even though a lot of people won't go there at first, I'm a big believer that you still should have a website, only because you might have ancillary stuff. You might say, well, we thought we were gonna make a lot of money on ads. That won't happen. So maybe you end up selling t-shirts or whatever it is.
By the way, you actually have to have a website if you want to get in Google Podcasts, because there's not a submit page yet. So they index your webpage. So you have to have a website. But I'm just saying, a lot of people get enamored with their website, and they think it's the be-all, end-all, and then they find out that less than 1% of their audience comes from the website.
Okay.
I use Libsyn's default website. It's just a very basic, here's my episodes, and I've never bothered with a real website.
Okay. And then from that, you can get on all the platforms you want to.
Google Podcast pulls that as the website.
Google Podcasts right now there is no submit page. They crawl the web and they find your podcast. Now, this this is not shoot the messenger time here, but the way it works is you have to have header code that references your RSS feed in your website, and your RSS feed has to reference that web page, and that web page can only have header code for one RSS feed, and that website can only be for that podcast. And then Google, if all these things align and everything looks good, they'll index you and they'll add you to their directory, which is like the second most important place to be, or third really behind Spotify. But it's one of the most important places to be because that's going to eventually be the default one on Android devices. It's kind of semi-default right now.
I really don't mean to get in the weeds, but I feel like that's partly why we're here, right? So the Libsyn, what's the word called? Widget or whatever for WordPress website. Is that the RSS feed that Google Play might pick up?
It's in Libsyn case, it'll be your showselect.libsyn.com/RSS.
Okay.
And that is nothing to do with WordPress. Because
that's a plugin, sorry.
Right, yeah, but it doesn't have anything to do with the WordPress plugin. The WordPress plugin is actually to help you publish on your WordPress site new posts.
Okay.
And it's separate than the RSS feed. And you can have a website that's separate from Libsyn and have your RSS feed with Libsyn and your website over here. A lot of people do that.
We do.
Yeah, so you just, okay, I think I understand.
And I know this does get confusing, and some of you are new and getting ready, and at the end here, I'll have a few slides for anybody who's new that wants to stick around and show you what information you need for new podcasts, what you have to get ready, and where to submit to, so we can go over that as well.
Any other questions? So, I have a question about Audacity. And because I've heard, I know Rob mentioned before that it's not great. You said for recording only.
Right.
Audacity is the only thing I've ever used for editing my podcast.
Okay.
And I get a lot of compliments on my sound quality. So I'm wondering, what are the negatives of it? Because it's all I've ever used. Like, I don't know anything different.
All right, that's a fair question. You probably know more about this.
Here's what I always say. The best audio editing software is the one you already know. Right? Because every other one that you're going to learn is going to have a learning curve, and you're going to be like, oh, life is too short. I've used so many different programs just because I have to test them out and try them out. And I go back to GarageBand because that's what I learned 15 plus years ago was GarageBand. So, but I've used everything. I've used Audacity, Audition, Hindenburg, you name it. But I come back to GarageBand. Because I just don't have time to get as proficient in the other programs as I am in GarageBand.
Well, and that's what I keep thinking too, because you said Hindenburg a couple months ago, and I was like, like, should I switch? Like, is Audacity really that bad? Because my podcast sounds good. I don't know. I don't know if I should switch.
It's just ease of use. And if you went to like Adobe Audition, it would be a pretty smooth transition because Audition and Audacity are pretty similar. But in Audacity, you have to stop the player, select something, delete it, and then start it. In Audition, it can just be going on the fly, and you can be selecting parts and deleting them as you go.
Right.
Little simple things like
right.
that. I think Audacity actually has better compression than Audition.
Oh, really? Adobe Audition is going to give you better audio quality sound at 64 and 96 kilobits because it uses the Fraunhofer encoder. And Audacity uses the lame encoder, which does not sound as good at 64 kilobits. So there is a difference there if you're encoding at the lower end between the two. Fraunhofer is a better encoder. That's what GarageBand uses and Adobe Audition uses. So those two use the Fraunhofer encoder. I believe that's also what Hindenburg uses.
So, Mike, what kind of ratio should somebody expect to, like if I record 30 minutes, how long should I spend editing 30 minutes of audio?
As long as you need to.
That was a good question, apparently.
So somebody who does this like you do, like, because like, if I record 30 minutes, I spend 45 minutes editing it, because you got to get through it. But I don't spend a lot more time. But you know.
Did anybody see President Trump's speech yesterday? He had so many sniffles, and as an editor, I was just listening, going, I would have spent 2 hours editing that to get all the sniffles out.
Well, I do, I
Yeah.
take out
the
sniffles and
breaths.
ums and stuff.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, what did they teach you in school?
But it's,
As
again,
long as it takes?
As long as it takes,
Okay.
yeah. Especially the case if you're dealing with video. It's just
Well,
say
yeah,
as
that's a
long
whole
as
other
you.
thing.
I think it can be really frustrating, but what I try to think about too is my listener. And I don't want there to be anything that is uncomfortable for my listener to listen. So I don't want a lot of stumbling over words. I don't want a lot of ums, a lot of extended pauses. Like, I will spend the time to take that stuff out because I want it to be such a smooth listening experience that they enjoy listening to it. I don't want any hiccups in it.
So how much
Because
time
that's why
would
they
you
come back.
typically take?
Yeah.
Or
I
is
would
there
say,
a-
I would say a 45-minute to an hour-long episode will probably take me 2.5, maybe 3 hours to edit.
Yeah, and so for her podcast, it's usually about, what's the episode? 20 to 30 minutes length. She's been doing this for a while now. She did a 20-minute short story of mine that I recorded in audio, and how long did it take you to edit that? Much longer.
A long time.
Yeah, so in terms of just, you never know, it was a different format, and I don't speak as much as she does, but it was literally a shorter period, and I think you spent almost twice as much time as you normally do going through the editing, because I have a lot of puffs.
That was your answer, as long as it takes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And like my solo episodes now, I've been doing it enough and I script them so it's pretty comfortable. So like my solo episodes, when it's just me, won't take nearly that long.
Mhm.
But when I'm doing an interview, and that's also not only editing out all the main stuff, but mastering, adding my intro and outro, that's everything from beginning to end. For an hour-long episode, it just takes me about 3 hours.
And if you're going to interview people, the people you interview, if you're hoping that they're going to promote that interview, edit out their ums, uhs, you knows, stammers, restarts, sniffles, and coughs. Because if they listen to the interview and they think they sound bad, they're not going to promote it. But if they sound brilliant, they're going to be like, wow, you have to listen to this. They may even put a link to it on the front page of their website or blog or whatever.
I know people are always like, oh my gosh, I sounded so good. And I'm like, well, you should have heard the wrong one.
Mhm.
Because it's a very different product.
You can help yourself as an editor too, if you are the host or you're recording it, if you coach your guest to say, if you stumble, it's okay. Just take a second, pause, and start over again. You don't have to sit there and apologize. You don't have to, you know, if you stumble over words, just take a breath and keep going. If you're doing a phone interview or one-on-one in person, and it'll help you on the back end because you have the obvious space that it takes to bring that clip over.
Right, and to that point, even more, also with that, telling somebody you're editing, it's going to put them at ease.
Oh, it makes them so much more
Right, if you tell someone that you're not going to edit, hey, 10,000 people are going to hear you, go. Right, but if they feel that they're being edited and they know that they can mess up, then they're going to be more relaxed and they're not going to mess up as much.
I always say that too, like if you have to sneeze or anything, like just pause, and I can edit all that stuff out, so don't freak out about it. Yeah, it's huge.
That's a great, you just said something that I think is a good segue to the question I have. So when you're editing for content versus the ums and making people sound good, when is it smart to notify your audience? Where, like, if you have a lengthy interview, right, and you've excerpted out and excised a couple of bits out, do you have any recommendations or anything for a pod? Because you might want to let your audience know, right? Some of this content, it's not the full interview.
No, I wouldn't.
You wouldn't explain
the
that
full
or
interview
anything,
is
or-
what goes up on the feed.
Right, it is the full interview,
Yeah.
it's just the finished product.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of stuff goes on the cutting room floor. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I would, when I was interviewing people with Podcast 101, I would be going, okay, hey, move this answer back earlier in the episode. And sometimes I would think of a great follow-up question near the end of it, and I would ask the person the follow-up question and move it right after where it was, so I'd sound like a great interviewer. But it also flowed better, right? It was better content. So it's not live. The audience doesn't need to know all the gaps.
Yeah, because they don't know the difference, and I've learned that with guests too, like whoever I'm interviewing, like they don't remember what they said to know if you cut different things out. They have no idea.
Do you share, I've read different things, do you share it with your guests when you've interviewed them?
Yes.
Well,
let
I mean,
them
before,
listen,
before.
I mean, you let them listen to it, that's a dangerous game.
I would not do that unless they said that ahead of time. Like, I've had some celebrities where I had to share it with the interview that's finished before, but otherwise, I'm sending it to them 5 minutes before it goes live on the feed. Like, here it is, or right after it went live, because I don't want to have to deal with that. I mean,
Is it worth, so, because mine's a performing arts and a lot of the people I'm interviewing have agents and are artists and so forth, is it worth asking them, do you need to hear this before it goes live?
Let them tell you.
Like,
Let them tell you
Okay.
that's what they want, yeah. Because they will, I mean, they'll say that, like, we need to hear it before it goes up, like, they'll tell you that.
Yeah.
And just say, if you say anything during this episode that you don't want in there, let me know immediately, and I'll remove it before it gets published.
And sometimes you're gonna know, they're gonna say something, you're gonna know that's not gonna be in the final. I interviewed Quincy Jones, you start talking about women in muffin tops. It's like, yeah, that's not gonna go in the final thing. I just know his PR people are gonna say no, and I was like, yeah.
Use your discretion in terms of what you keep in a podcast episode. As for sharing with my guests, I will always share the finished version with my guests. And in case you're wondering what type of guests I get, it's just my friends. Yeah.
You share it before you go live, so they can say.
Well, so they get an idea of what it's going to sound like and everything.
And when you do share, don't just share the link. Share pre-produced tweets, the embed code to the media player. So you share the direct link, the embed code to the player that they can just paste someplace. You give them a couple of basically tweets that they can just copy and paste with the links. Yeah. So you do everything for them, make their life as easy as possible for them to share it.
Any other questions?
So I think you mentioned doing phone interviews. What would you use to record a phone interview?
Okay, for myself, using a phone interview, I use a service called Blog Talk Radio. blogtalkradio.com is the website. You can conduct the interview over the phone. It'll automatically record you and everything, but the downside is it's going to sound like you're having a phone conversation. All right. I think Rob knows a little more about this in terms of Skype.
I do Skype. I record with Skype. But here's the thing: if you're going to record Skype on your side, you're recording. Like, one way to do is you can just have someone Skype in. They can call in, Skype in, or you can Skype out. Your side's going to sound really good, and theirs is going to sound like they're on the phone. You actually want to make sure you take your side of the recording and you actually take down the bandwidth of it a little bit to make yourself sound a little bit tinny, so you sound closer to how they sound. Otherwise, you're going to be this real clear, and then they sound like they're in a can. And going back and forth, it's actually more disconcerting to the listener. If you can bring your quality down just a little bit in post, I call it DQing yourself, basically. It actually sounds better to the listener if you have a long, especially if it's an hour-long interview, and you're doing a lot of talking and they're doing a lot of back and forth. But I use Skype. I'll take it out to a mixer or a Zoom H6, and I'll bring the audio out of the computer and I have my mic in there, and then they hear me through the mic from the computer onto Skype. There's also a program on the Mac called Call Recorder that you can record right from Skype right on the computer. And then on the PC side, there's a program called Pamela, but I hear it doesn't work with the current version of Skype. I think now, but I do think the new version of Skype you can actually record in.
Yeah, you can.
Right. And there's MP3 Skype Recorder, which is a freeware.
Yeah.
Also, have you used, I get it through the university, but have you used Zoom? Because it's something
I was going to say, I use Zoom,
Yep.
and I set up a lot, like what you said, like I go route through my computer, through my Zoom handy recorder, on Zoom, online.
Right. Yeah.
And I just ask my guests, like I just started, I used to record all my episodes only in person, and I traveled to do it because I travel a lot anyway, so it just worked out. I just started doing it remote. I use Zoom. It actually sounds really good. I just asked my guest to have a microphone, even like earbuds with a microphone, to bring up their sound quality a little bit, and everybody has been really cool with that. I haven't had any issues with it at all.
There's a great service called IPDTL, that it's a web-based service used on Chrome. And as long as the person is using some sort of something mic and they're not sitting in their kitchen, it sounds really good. It's very clean, and you can adjust the bandwidth on both sides. It's got an onboard mixer, so you can adjust levels and record it live. It's great.
Say it again.
IPDTL.
Oh, but do say this to your people you're interviewing: they can't be driving in the car.
Oh, no.
I've had people do that. They're like, okay, yeah, we have an interview set up. And they go, oh, good, I'm going to be driving home from work at that time. I'm like, no, okay, we're going to find another time.
I had a kid that called in on his phone and it died. I'm like, how would you call with only 2% battery life? How did you even think that was okay? And it sounded crazy. It was a great interview, but then there were 2 parts, and it did sound crazy when, I had to put them together, but...
So maybe you can have the other person record also. I always do that, so you hear both sides of it.
Now, here is the hardest thing to do when you're doing an interview, is tell the person you're talking to that their side sounds really bad. If you get a call and the background noise, the dogs are barking, the kids are screaming, they're in the car, whatever it is, and you know it's just going to sound bad, say, look, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
We need to change the time, you need to change the background, you need to put a muzzle on the dog or the kid or both, whatever you got to do.
I've told a guest to go to your closet.
Yeah.
Go take a chair and just sit in your closet or whatever you have, and it'll sound great.
And I say that beforehand too, for people coming on my show. I say all you need is a microphone and a quiet space to record. And because I don't want my sound quality to be really...
And you mentioned earlier headphones. Headphones are really important. They should not be doing this Skype call with you without headphones.
Yeah.
Because there will be feedback and you'll hear yourself, and that's even more disconcerting when you're talking and you hear yourself a half a second off. Oh.
Some people bang their hands when they're talking.
I know I say that all the time, especially in person, because your microphone stands will be sitting there, people start talking with their hands, and I'm like, oh,
I actually take my wedding ring off before I record.
Yeah, so it doesn't tap.
Because I always hit, and that click, it'll hit, and I know that I'm going to pick it up. I'm going to hear that. I'm like, oh, and it's going to drive me nuts as an editor later on.
Yeah. I have a little checklist that I go through with people as soon as we get on the phone, where it's telling them, if you have to sneeze or something, just pause, no big deal. Turn your phone off. Like, I just kind of go through that stuff before we start and give them a rundown.
Any other questions?
I try to, one other that hadn't really been mentioned, I try to get them on Skype and then tell them to just take their phone and put it on voice memo and lay it down in front of them and record that and then share that file with me. And I record mine. I mean, we're talking over Skype, but I don't use that. I use it on YouTube. I'll record mine with my Zoom recorder, and they'll send that to me, and I put those two together on the timeline, and it gives pretty good quality.
But one of the other things on the interviewing is, wherever possible, control the whole recording. Because if you can do it, if you have a co-host double ender, like me and Elsie will do double enders. But if you're going to rely on a non-technical person to record their side, you're going to wind up being disappointed. Or at least if they are recording their side, make sure you're recording both sides.
Right.
So you've got that backup. Because it's you can't say anything to your guests if they mess up, right? What are you going to say to them? And the other thing is also make sure you always hit record. Everybody has that story of that great interview they lost when they realized they hadn't hit record.
Any other questions?
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. This is fun. Now, this podcast is uncalled for. It's hosted, produced, and edited by myself, Mike Chernevsky. Opening music is Fantasia by Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com. Licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license. Outro music is Verana Sensual by Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com. Licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license.
If you would like to support this podcast or any of Mike's other creative endeavors, please consider making a donation at patreon.com/Mike Chernevsky. That's MikeCzerniewski. Donations over $5 will receive a special thanks on a future podcast. Thank you so much for listening. We will see you next time.